welcome you. Some who have been on the journey with us over the last year know that at the end of the session, I will have one of our team members put together a nice recording of today. It will be a video recording and on Spotify. It will be on the jennifervessels.com Journey into the Future site somewhere by the 1st of next week. We love to get feedback. We are already planning for January and March sessions. January 21st is the next one. So in the chat, you'll see the Survey Monkey that we'd love to get your feedback at the end of this session to help us in that planning. So with that, I want to just take a moment and say we are very honored today to have Carver Matthias. And I still, in 20 years of knowing and working with you, Carver, I don't think I've ever figured out how to pronounce your last name. But he is a technology advisor and a previous colleague of mine and some of the other folks here on our session, going back to days of ShoreTel, where he and Tripp and Wayne and a number of folks were key leaders, and they were a client of Next Step back some time ago. And in fact, we were just saying as we were waiting for you guys to come into the room that one of the real advantages of people is that we enjoy reconnecting with people. And I don't think any of us would have said, oh, let's make sure we mark our calendar to reconnect with an AI. So we're all about people. And today we will spend some time giving some perspectives, giving some examples from Carver and my experience, but we really want this to be interactive. So as I'm talking here for 10 minutes or so, if you have a question, if you have a thought, a comment, feel free to put in the chat or wave your hand if I don't see, because I don't see everyone when I'm speaking. Carver will beat me and stop me, and we'll jump in with questions. But I'll share a little bit for about 10 minutes and we'll have some Q&A and open discussion, and then Carver will share. We do live in an interesting time. And so that's really the intent of this journey. It's a journey of exploration. It's a journey of learning together. It's a journey of co-creating the future, because there are a lot of pressures today. Now, more than any time in my 30 years of career, there's pressure on everybody. Do more, do much faster, achieve more, adapt, shift, change. And yet there are times, especially on the European side of the pond, which is where I'm currently based, there are times when I hear people say, oh, it's kind of challenging, but there's a whole new world coming. All of our problems will soon be solved. It will just magically, mystically happen, because there is an AI for that. Soon the technology will take over, take our problems, create sales, create communications, create new solutions, and we as people can just kind of sit back and put our feet up. Now, I don't know many people that actually believe that. I think for some, that's a nice pipe dream. For others, there's a view that in the foreseeable future, we will all have something like a little personal assistant, a little robot that will just take things and sort them and do them for us. Back a year ago, when we started this series, Thomas Aguilera and I talked about having my PAE talk to your PAE and just sort out all of our schedules. We aren't quite there yet, but there is a set of tools that are coming out that are considered personal AI assistants. So this is one. It's from inflection.io. It's called Pi, and you can use it on your computer system, on your laptop. You can use it on your mobile phone. And its vision is to be able to take what you're looking for, take your needs, integrate the various AI tools and bots that are out there, and help you get to the right tool to solve your problems. I've started using it a little bit over the last month, and I will say that when I ask a question, when I have a need, it does tend to be slightly more accurate than a Chat GPT or an Anthropic or a Gemini or some of the other tools. So I would just put that out there as one to watch for, and you can download, you can use it, because I believe that we are definitely in a period where we are creating the technology along with the technical experts. So there's an AI for that. Not exactly the right answer. Others, and more of the large corporations are saying, oh, we'll solve this problem by having a chief AI officer. We need somebody that is a technical expert, computer science, understands data analysis. We'll have him or her run the AI. Do you all think that's a good idea?
I think it's definitely an interim idea, right? I think that eventually, just like compliance and cybersecurity and other things, that it's going to start to get rolled into a lot of other roles, particularly CIO, CTO. I think you're going to be expected to be able to just have that subject matter expertise, right? And to stay abreast of it. Now, you may have a specialist on your team because it kind of does take a specialist right now just to keep up with everything that's going on. Um, but no, it's a very interesting evolution. It doesn't surprise me, but I don't think that's long lived.
I would strongly agree with that. And things are moving so quickly, so rapidly for a large company in an area with highly sensitive data, like healthcare, for example. I do see a role of having a AI expert that can be giving guidance, can be giving instructions, can be helping others in the organization. But I don't believe the answer is hire a chief AI officer, give them budget to hire a bunch of other chief AI mini-me's to actually drive this. We all see how that worked with the chief digitalization officer, the chief IO officer, etc. So ultimately, I believe the answer is look at your business and figure out within the business how to best utilize AI to solve business problems. About a year ago, I and our team in Next Step did a global study where we looked at about 25 companies in all industries, from finance to health to education to technology, entertainment, consumer, etc. And the ones that had succeeded the most in utilizing AI by March of 24, when we concluded it, were the ones that started with this business problem question. What are some of the things that we have been struggling with for years that probably require vast quantities of data, probably require some detailed technical analysis of information and research, and things that are just simply routine, repetitive, and every time we sit down to solve it, there's a human aspect where we don't have the resources, we don't have the skills to do that. So start by thinking about the unsolved business problems and then consider AI as one of the tools that you can use in going through a methodical innovation process. This is compared to the companies that did not have such good success in their AI adventures a year ago. Those companies started with the AI. We want to learn how to use Copilot, and we're going to train a bunch of people on Copilot and let them go at it and try to do everything. That doesn't work. So to identify the business problem, not the AI. And then once you have the problem down, open up the ideation of what are the things that we may want to use an AI for. It could be that we need to generate content. That's a chat GPT. It may be that we need to really analyze detailed confidential information. That might be a very specific tool for our industry. So think about the problem and which is the right tools, and start small. So start with thinking about your biggest problem, but you don't put the whole problem into the AI tool. You start with one little segment. What is the first milestone that we might be able to achieve, and the criteria where we will determine, did this work or not? Set small, simple timelines, weekly check-ins, every 2 weeks check-in. How's it going? And then in those check-ins, evaluate, are we meeting the success criteria? If so, then let's expand. Let's take on another element of this problem. If not, back to the old pivoting, let's determine either a different tool or a different way of approaching the tool, different prompting, different involvement with that particular tool that we've been using. So it starts with the business. It follows a very similar innovation process that we've used in other areas, and requires people to discern. And by discernment, I mean using the human intelligence, the human context, to be able to say, does this make sense? In fact, a couple of weeks ago, I had a whole set of numbers that I needed to crunch together and then to divide. I put that into an AI tool and said, add these up and then divide by 15. And what I got back was like something like 1,056. And I sat there going, hang on a second, I am not a math wizard, but I can just look at these numbers and know that even without dividing, it doesn't come anywhere near 1,056. And when I went back and challenged it, saying that could not be right. Oh, very, very good catch. Let me try that again. So think about, does it make sense? And think critically. How will this actually be used in our company in solving this problem? How might this impact other people in the organization? Personally, I don't believe that in at least my lifetime, we're going to see AI be able to have true, deep human empathy. That's the unique factor that I believe we will always bring to the table, that human to human, call it a soul, call it intuition, to be able to determine how is the solution from AI going to impact other people based upon how we know those people, and based upon the interactions we've had in the past. That's all part of that discernment that is so critical. So we're in a world with a lot coming at us, all of us, more and more pressures each day. And I know for myself and for all of my clients today, when something new comes in, we have a tendency to react. Let me just get that email off to him. Yep, I'm going to like that. And yes, I'm going to push that on to the next person. Yep, that looks good. Let me send that off. We all have that tendency because we have so much coming at us. But for that reason, and because some of what is coming at us is AI generated, and AI does hallucinate, it does make mistakes, it's more important now than ever that we not react, but that we respond. We take that extra minute and say, let me understand this. Let me question, where did this come from? Why is this person asking me this? Does this make sense? If so, send your response back. If not, go back and question it. Because my fear of AI is not the technology. My fear is the people and how we can, in a rush, in a flurry, in an emotional state, accept, do, and use the results from AI in a negative way. And so the real goal to me is human intelligence. It is having that empathy, having context, thinking critically, but using the tool to speed and accelerate and deepen what we as people are able to do. Now, I saw, Reese, I believe you had your hand up, and I'm sure others have questions and comments. So I'm going to stop sharing here and get back where I can see you guys. So please jump in with questions.
I was just gonna say that this wave that we're catching here, it's going to create a lot of demand and importance for the business analyst function, namely the person who basically sits as the liaison between business challenges, business outcomes, and technology, right? Because they're going to be the ones that can sit in and look at a business process from end to end. What is the input? What is the desired output? And then communicate with a systems analyst to start thinking about the art of the possible. And so that's then where automation opportunities come in, and that can look like either just an AI use case, or it can be something to the effect of generative AI, which they are two very different things. But
Yes.
um, I do think that I was just going to say um, that business analyst role is going to be probably one of the most important ones here, and everyone's going to have a demand for them here over the next, I would even say, 2 to 3 years.
I completely agree. So if you're going to spend your money, don't invest in one expensive chief AI officer, but three or four really good business analysts that can be that connection point. Well said, Reese. Matthew, you have a question.
It's around how to train your AI. Because when you talk about, I use AI for generating email content just to get a different perspective because I'm sitting here all on my own, like Matty no mates. But that I was just thinking like articles of association, corporate governance, company law. When it's when you said chief AI executive, I thought compliance. If you're going to get advice from something, that
Mm-hmm.
has to know what the vision of your company is, what the
Mm-hmm.
mission, what your values are, what your articles of association are,
Mm-hmm.
and everything else. So, like just saying, I've got a problem in a project meeting, blah, 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 blah. Can you help me out?
Mm-hmm.
Without the context, as you say, of what actually is going on and without all the stuff that's in our heads, how is the AI going to give an accurate answer to that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and that's a very good point. And I would say if there is a chief something officer, it would be more of compliance and setting the ground rules. I mean, there's so many people that I hear saying, oh, the government or a separate standards body needs to tell us how to use AI. I don't believe that's possible because again, AI is evolving so very quickly. But within a company should have a compliance process to determine what are the ground rules, what are the guardrails that we want to put on so that people feel comfortable and safe to explore both use, but also, as I see here in the chat, there's questions around the data. I mean, that's part of the guidelines that need to be provided of what kind of data should be shared in an AI tool.
There's an industry um, coming up, right? It's like the gold rush, I think. Wasn't this the analogy, Carver, you and I talked about before, lots of people made money from the gold, but lots of people made a lot more money from coming up with Levi Strauss and making pickaxes and everything else that went along with it. But there's a whole industry coming up around governance and compliance of AI use within an organization. I've been talking to a couple of those companies recently because we're working on some projects with companies that they're putting their crown jewels. If you think about it, if you implement a proper data strategy, you're now putting everything in the same place. All the more reason why it needs to be safe in a way of accessibility to your organization for your use and operations, but also safe from anybody who's not supposed to get to it. But also that information is now easier for your employees to get a hold of, and what they're doing with it is more critical. So it's a little big brother. It's a little uncomfortable when you get into the conversations about what these technologies are capable of doing. It's probably nothing that Google isn't already doing to all of us, but now it's publicly, right? It's being shared, and people are purchasing these solutions and these services for this purpose. So, but I do think that to your point, Jennifer, you're right. There needs to be governance and compliance around it, even in the most private, small organizations. So the information doesn't end up in the wrong place. And I know people are bringing those things to the table. So it'll be interesting to see if that ends up standing on its own, or if the AI companies start to acquire those services and they become included in some of it, right? So
It's a very good point. And just as you said, to put all of your crown jewels in one tool, my first reaction was, no, that's pretty stupid. Determine, here is a little piece of the problem. Here is the minimum amount of data that we can upload into a tool to try to experiment. Can we solve the problem? So think about what you upload, think about the quantity of what you upload, and think about how you're using those crown jewels. That's back to the human capacity to think. And I continue to be surprised in talking to people in very powerful, large companies that aren't thinking these things through.
Cass had an interesting comment earlier too, right? Maybe Cass, you can expand on it a little bit, but at her company, they're running into entire AI and machine learning boards within as a function within the company, not just an individual.
It's great.
That's right. I think to address the concern of compliance around AI, and really a lot of companies not understanding the delta between generative AI and AI as like a natural language processing or like a data processor rather than a creative engine. And so, what we're seeing, at least right now, from a trend perspective, is that it's added a lot of time to the SecOps review portion of the process, because now they have, if this is an AI tool, I have like an additional things to go through to make sure that our data is safe, our customer information is secure, that the HIPAA data is compliant, all of those kind of things. And it's adding a lot of time, and there's a lot of uncertainty around it. And I think you've hit on that a few times, as AI is not by any means new technology, but the consumerization of the IT AI function is relatively new. And that creates a different awareness of what AI is and how it can be used. And in that, it also creates an uncertainty or a fear that needs to be addressed. And sometimes paralysis by analysis ensues. And so we're seeing that in our sales process and extending of our sales process.
Interesting. That's a great point. In fact, last week at a conference, I heard Chat GPT referred to as the mosaic. Some of us remember back to the mosaic and the Netscape. It's the mosaic of AI. That AI research technology has been there for years. This is the first consumer aspect, which has spawned this whole new world, if you will.
If I can add to that, this reminds me, because I'm an old fart, back in the days when people started doing the analysis of data, and their data wasn't clean. So I think Reese brought that up at the top of the meeting about wow, your data's got to be clean. Well, what does clean mean? And how do you ensure that you have that? And then I think Cass mentioned data integrity is another issue. So, you know, just applying the tool is insufficient. And Cass mentioned the security issues. But I think there it would be useful to have a step by step before you use, and Jennifer, you kind of showed some of the things that you need to think about to break down the problem, because you do step one, you don't just throw the whole problem at it, and you want to understand what the outcome is. But I mean, I've seen a lot of things out there on AI associated with this tool for that, this tool for that, this tool for that. I don't see a whole lot out there that says before you think about using a tool, because AI is not a one solution for everything. You need to pick the right tool for the job. It's kind of
Yes.
like I'm a car mechanic. So, yeah, I have a lot of general tools, but you got to have special tools to solve special problems. So, the issue of understanding AI as it can be a powerful tool is one, make sure you start with a nice clean database. Second thing, if you're doing you're using it against a language model, sorry, against the language model, what was that model's bias?
Mm-hmm.
So you have to know what that model's bias is up front. Because in the old days, when you went in and looked at your data, you could kind of see, depending on what you're trying to do, that the data itself had some bias.
Mm-hmm.
So you can correct for that if you want to try to get to a nice, clean solution. But this step by step process as a checklist, I don't see that popping out. I just see a lot of, hey, jump on the bandwagon and use this stuff. It's exciting, it's new.
Yeah, yeah. To echo on that, Kurt, I think so. You all this discussion is reminding me of kind of a cautionary tale. Y'all may have seen, I think it was last year, a big story about Air Canada and how they had deployed a chatbot. And one of the experiences that a passenger had was that they'd had an issue come up where they were going to have to cancel their flight to attend a funeral. I believe it was a bereavement sort of situation. And so they were conversing with the chatbot and saying, "Hey, I've had a death in the family. I'm going to have to cancel my flight." And the chatbot told the person, "Oh, no problem. Our bereavement policy is as long as you cancel within this amount of time, you'll get this full refund and blah, 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 and those sorts of things." And it turns out that that was not true. In fact, when the person went to do that and was informed, there is no refund, they're like, "But your chatbot told me that there is." Then Air Canada tried to say, "Well, we're not responsible for what the chatbot told you." And a lawsuit got filed over it. This went to court.
Excellent.
And the person won, by the way. The individual won their case after, all this time and money. And it was incredible, the organization trying to throw their hands up and say, "Oh, I'm not responsible for what that's not true at all, obviously."
Yeah.
Even if it's not, even if it wasn't deemed legally true, it's going to be true in the eyes of the general public, right? Like, hey, if your stuff tells me something, I need to be able to believe it.
Yeah.
And I never heard what the resolution was on that. Like, it would have been interesting, obviously, to see the behind the scenes forensics. Was it dirty data? Like, was there some draft of a bereavement policy that was in the data pool, or something that used to exist but didn't anymore? Or did the AI really just make it up? And I think that this is a great example of, I've enjoyed saying the pun of the intelligent use of artificial intelligence. That wasn't a very intelligent use, right? They didn't do the right things ahead of time. And there was another key example, y'all may have seen it, City of New York, where they had a chatbot. And I'm not anti-chatbot, by the way. It's just these are two examples. And it was advising landlords around policies and things they could do, and it was telling them they could do things that were literally against the law. And this made the newspaper, right? So I couldn't agree more with the data integrity piece of that. And a lot of companies haven't done that in general. They need to clean up the room before they invite company over, right? And and they haven't really thought through putting all the right guardrails around things. And it also goes to another comment that was in the chat about AI. I believe a lot of people believe should enhance human activity, not replace it. And we're going to talk about that here in the next section a little
Yes.
bit.
Why don't you bring up your viewpoints there, Carver, and
Sure.
share a few more bits.
Yeah, so I've just got a few slides. And by the way, Jennifer, I hadn't shared, but when I saw this photo, I think this is the Jennifer of the future, right? So as we're looking into the future, I can kind of
I
see a
agree,
resemblance
totally
here,
agree.
right? I can totally see this being you in
Oh my
like the year
God,
2035,
this
maybe,
is
right?
great, especially those
Yeah.
of you that have known me 30 some odd years.
Apparently, you pick up a proclivity for neck tattoos too at this point. I don't know, but not judging. But anyway, no, I appreciate the chance to talk about all this today because it is such a rapidly evolving environment and it's really confusing. And so, as Jennifer and I were preparing for this, obviously in parallel, the U.S. has been going through this amazing election cycle, whatever you think of it. And I'm not going to talk about any candidates or any parties or anything like that today. But one of the things that was surfaced that's a parallel here is kind of this information war or battle that we're fighting to get to truth because there is more information out there than ever. And if we just draw a parallel for a moment between the information that was being distributed during this last election cycle in the US, it really highlighted for me personally, but I think for a lot of people, the difference between information and as we say when we swear in on the stand here, the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And we found that a lot of brokers of information weren't necessarily providing all the information, right? Or they were slanting things a certain way. And so I've kind of developed this rubric that I use when I'm consuming news, for example, but I think it's the same sort of approach you should take when you're looking at the results that have been produced by AI. First, what is my source? We just talked about having clean data, but it's also having data from a reliable source. And is the information accurate? That sounds funny, but even in the slides Jennifer had earlier, you could tell they were AI generated images because the words were misspelled, right? AI hasn't figured out how to spell yet when it's creating artwork. It will, but for now, that's a great example of something that was not accurate. Is the information complete? Back to my news story example, there, whatever your political affiliation or what news sources you typically like to watch, if you go watch something from the other source, from the other side, you'll get a totally different story, right? And it's often because things have been cherry picked. In fact, especially whenever somebody like a candidate was being quoted and then somebody in the media was making a comment about the quote, I would go back and find the original video clip and watch it. And you would often find out that without the context, which is another thing we've been talking about, the actual meaning was something completely different. Um, it's also important to look at sequencing. And there's an example I had seen where somebody had asked an AI to describe the procedure for delivering a breech baby. And a doctor was reviewing the information that it generated, and it's like, this looks great, except it reversed steps 14 and 15. Well, that's a big deal. Right? Like it was accurate, it was complete, but it was in the wrong order, so it wasn't correct. I mean, like, and you wouldn't want to follow that. We talked about context, and thank you for bringing up biases, right? There are biases in data. There's also biases just clearly in the election cycle we went through. Lots of sources that when I was young, when I was young, the evening news and folks like Walter Cronkite, I'm really dating myself, were folks that you felt like you could trust, that you were getting an objective, full report. And now it's kind of out in the open that many news sources are clearly have a bias and they're not even trying to hide it anymore. So now the onus is back on us to say, what is the real information? What's the full story? What do I think about it? And also, what is the agenda? Jennifer and I were talking about how if you're in a media organization, you're after advertising dollars and you get that through eyeballs. You get that through people consuming your content. And they have found that contentious content often gets more interaction than not. And so sometimes it seems that there's a leaning toward creating a little bit of drama, right? Or adding wood to the fire. So it's been interesting to see how that parallel of how we evaluate information in our personal lives carries over into the business environment. And as we think about AI, and if you're using generative AI in particular, I think these are really good questions to ask.
Hey Carver, just a quick question. I'd love your thoughts on this. As you're talking about this, we talked earlier about the governing bodies that would like ultimately regulate AI. Do you feel like there's any sort of regulatory capture that's kind of happening as far as like the governing bodies are doing it more so in the interest of that governing body as opposed to maybe regulating for the purpose of the private or for the people essentially?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question that could kind of be its own session even. But my brief answer is I think a couple of things. One, that I do think that regulations and new industries can be important, um, because um, as much as I'm pro-capitalism, it is also self-serving, right? And it doesn't always serve the common good, right? So that's where you have to have this
Right.
balance between public and private, I think. And generally, when government and industry agree to work together is when we get the best results for a lot of different things, especially things that are far reaching. Also, however, at the same time, I haven't seen government be very efficient in most
Mm,
cases, or timely. And so I
mm,
think that's our challenge, right? Jennifer mentioned folks waiting for government regulations, and there's a real danger in that because things are moving
right.
faster than they are. And
Right.
often it's not just in the US, often the different parties in different countries aren't in agreement about a lot of things. And so it's really difficult to get things done. And so I think that this is why, to me, and I've always just been this way personally and in business, we all have to be personally accountable for learning as much as we can and being as wise as we can about using this incredible new tool. I have, when I've been talking to non-technical people, I've said, look, AI is like fire. Fire does great things for us in a controlled environment,
Mm,
right? It's powering
true.
this call right now, most likely,
Yeah.
right? It's electricity. It's heating and cooling your homes. It powers your vehicles. I mean, there's all these things that fire does great in a controlled environment. But I wouldn't turn it over to somebody who hadn't been trained on it. I wouldn't leave it unattended to do whatever it wants to do, because we see catastrophic results, and I don't think it's a bad analogy. So anyway, did I answer your question, Reese? It was a good one.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And I think it was good to kind of get the conversation going about it. No, sounds great. Thank you.
Awesome. So I think one of the things Jennifer also started on that's important, and I run into this talking to clients a lot, they find the whole topic of AI overwhelming, because there now are so many different solutions that are coming on the market so fast that they can't keep up. There is a fear of the unknown. They're worried about security and compliance and privacy and biases and other things. And they feel kind of paralyzed. And so the approach that I've gone through with clients, that I've seen even echoed in chat here, is a couple of things. One, like Jennifer said, start with your business goals, right? Don't just deploy technology for the sake of it. Figure out what areas of your business you want to optimize. Start asking the questions of, do we think AI could help us here? But especially, and this was also another comment in chat, you look at areas where you can augment humans. So, brainstorm for a minute. If I didn't have to do the things in my job that I dislike, right? The tedious things, the repetitive things. If I could farm that out, right, to something I could reliably trust and then just go inspect the results, what would I do with that extra time and more importantly, energy? So that's kind of on the personal level. But I think it's also imperative for businesses to take a look and figure out what are the smart ways to use AI. So I gave some cautionary tales earlier. Let me give a use case Cass will appreciate. So, in addition to my tech advisory business, I have a management consulting company, and I've had the honor of working with a company called Drips. And one of the things that interesting to me about their solution is they are a managed service that does large scale one-to-one conversational outreach over SMS. And they leverage AI to understand the answers to all the prompts, right? They start every conversation with a question like, hey, Carver, I see you haven't scheduled your annual wellness visit. Can we connect you with somebody to get that on your calendar, right? And I might respond in a million different ways. And so they're using AI for the natural language processing component and to try to decide what action needs to happen next. And these conversations can take place over many days, right? So it's very different from a typical chat bot that's usually kind of just session based. It's one and done. It's very different from just the push notifications of like, hey, don't forget to vote. It's a true conversation, but they're not using the AI to generate any of the responses. So just like you would do with a human agent, there's pre-vetted information that the organization has said this is what's acceptable to share, right? And at the end of the day, one of the key goals is often to drive a conversation with a human. So it's not to replace those humans. In fact, it's creating a much better life for those customer service agents that are on the other end of that, because now they're talking to people that have demonstrated they are engaged and interested in taking an action, instead of using humans to have all these cold outreaches, get very frustrated, get a very low response rate, right? Now the humans are, their productivity goes through the roof. And by the way, employee retainment often goes up because they're having a much better day knowing that the people they're talking to really want to talk to them. So I think that's a great example of figuring out how can I use this tool within the scope, like in their case of a managed service. So it's not an AI offering, but it has a component in there. It's a tool, right? Like Kurt described, and I think it's brilliant. So start with those things, and then the next piece is, clearly document your security, your privacy, and your compliance requirements, depending upon your locale and your industry. There could be a lot of those, right? And just often getting them down on paper gives especially small to medium business owners a little more comfort that, okay, I'm going to start with the guardrails after I've identified the business goals. Involve all the key stakeholders in the conversation in your organization. So this shouldn't be something that just is declared from a chief AI officer, right? Because this is a technology that you need to train your whole organization on the acceptable use, which comes to the next piece. So once you've kind of gone through this strategic process, I think it's really critical to create an AI use policy. And I've offered templates to people to get started, because just like you have a policy on how it's acceptable to treat other humans in the workplace, for example, or a policy about your travel and expenses or whatever, right? You need to create an AI use policy. Here are the acceptable uses of AI in our company. Here are the areas that must always be considered. If there's a process that people need to go through before they use AI tools, here's what that process is. And then there's another step that I think is important, is once that policy is defined with all these other security, privacy, compliance requirements in mind, then you need to go to your vendors that you already work with, and you need to have some conversations mainly about data governance. Um, do you have AI in your solution that I'm already using? If you do, is that your proprietary AI, or are you working with a third party? Because if you're working with a third party, then I need to go have this conversation with them too. Where is that data stored? How is it encrypted? Is it only at rest or also in transit? What methods do you use? Can I request that it be deleted? Is it being used to train your model? If I pay a premium fee, can I keep it all private to me? All those questions need to be asked. And I've even suggested folks actually get the vendors, if they don't have it written out, to sign a little template, right? That kind of says, we've had these discussions, here were the answers. Some of that is peace of mind, but some of it is, kind of covering yourself legally too, in case something gets disclosed that wasn't supposed to be. You can show that you did the diligence to understand how that information was being used and where it lives.
Hey, Carver,
Yeah.
if I could back up one to involve all key stakeholders. My experience has been both as an internal consultant in companies that I've worked for, and also as a consultant. I early on took, you ask people and you ask senior management who are the key stakeholders. I learned the hard way that their view of who the key stakeholders are is often kind of like their peers. And in a process like you're building, I think there's several levels of key stakeholders. And I think it's important to understand when you're adopting the strategy. And by the way, I really love what you're doing here. And this is kind of the first time that I've seen this kind of clarity put forward. So, but on the key stakeholders, it's you need to identify the different levels and the different phases of what all key stakeholders means. Because when you leave people out that are truly going to be users and key stakeholders, that can create an adoption problem within the organization. So
It's
that's
a
just
great
my
point.
thought there.
No, that's a really excellent point, and I think it's something we've all seen, whether it be trying to get an organization to adopt a new technology or a new policy, whatever it is. If you don't involve enough of the right humans up front, there is typically a resistance. More importantly, you often have blind spots. So I've had the honor of working with a few people that are on this call, and I know I've lamented with more than one of them about being at a company where the executive level folks were making decisions without talking to the frontline managers and people that were actually out there talking to customers and business partners every day. And I've used the analogy that an organization is kind of like a fish. And while the leaders may be the tail, your frontline people are the eyes and the mouth. Right. And so like you need to have all of the neurons firing, in between those two things. Make sure that your information's complete, and that and so there's two components to that. One is making sure we gather the right requirements and concerns, but the other is absolutely the people buy-in piece of it. So really great point. Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, no, one of my experiences has been that I learned again the hard way of I started learning how to ask the question of who in your organization is going to, drag their feet on this, and who in your organization are really like the early adopters.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned that if you get the drag their feet in with the early adopters and they're in the front end adoption process and learning process, it isn't that it diminishes totally their resistance, but it certainly makes it a whole lot easier. And often those drag your feet kind of people have their own following within the organization, whether it be skepticism, oh, here comes another, management program and it'll just flop on its face eventually. So let's just keep working is
Yeah.
kind of the attitude that I've found, that pulling those key stakeholders that are the resistance type within the organization, making sure that they're at the table when you're there with the early adopters, it sure makes things a lot easier.
Yeah, it's a great point, and certainly why I've got it in that order before I get to that point of creating policy, right? I need to identify who all those right people should be, and ideally they're part of authoring that policy, right? So it's not just something handed down from the mountain. And then the other piece that ties into all that is you need to train employees. And to me, Jennifer and I were talking about this yesterday. I feel like AI is something that's part of a continual training track these days, like cybersecurity and compliance are. There's things we all need to be going through on a regular basis to stay up on what's new, what may have changed, what else we need to consider. And so I suggest that training programs related to the AI use policy are not one and done, that there should be incremental continual learning there. And then finally, it's important to monitor compliance. And some of this is human oversight and some of it's technology. There's DLP, data loss prevention technology out there that will help you try to keep things from being exported from your company into other tools, right? Even if the intent's not malicious, there are things that can be used to try to monitor that. So when I've walked people through this, they do get a little more calm. And thank you, Kurt, for the compliment, right? They're like, okay, this is, and it's like Jennifer started with, it's a structured approach, right? And we're not jumping straight to the end of the book. We're gonna we're gonna take this a chapter at a time and make sure we get all these pieces right. So my last slide, and then I'll hand it back to Jennifer, is so how do humans differentiate in an AI world? And we've talked about a few of these. I think critical thinking will elevate people as team members and as leaders probably more than ever. And I think a lot of this starts by questioning, where do we even get our own views, opinions, and perspectives? I mentioned like the election cycle stuff, right? There's some people that couldn't disagree with each other more. But where did that information come from, and where did that opinion come from? Was it based on something they heard or something they experienced or something they researched? I took a really interesting course while I was studying for my undergrad degree about media and advertising, and I didn't realize till then, and at the time I think I was 20, how many opinions I had about people and places and things that I had zero firsthand experience with, and it had all been because of content I had consumed, primarily movies I'd seen, right? I mean, like you can form opinions about things of like people on the other side of the world because you saw them in a movie.
Mhm.
And subconsciously, you don't even realize it. It creeps into your brain, right? And so I love that I'm having to challenge all those things in myself. And I would encourage everybody to do the same thing. Like it, even in my own house, my wife will read a text she got from somebody, and maybe it confirms a bias we already had toward a topic, right? But my first question, instead of like, heck yeah, I'm glad to hear that, is like, what's the source? Where did that come from? I want to go see it myself. And often if I go read the article, let's say, I'll find out that they were referencing some event where somebody spoke. And unless I go watch the actual event, I don't get the full story, but that's kind of the point. So what's the source and what are the counterpoints? I loved it when I've had the honor of leading teams that we encourage debate within the team. And I'm real thankful. I've got a couple of my favorite leaders on this call right now that they tolerated me challenging things when I was on their teams, right? Because I think that's how you get to the best answers. Here's a point of view. Well, what's the counterpoint to that? And not just for the sake of it, but to make sure that you're really getting the full view. So creativity and originality, and coming up with a vision and turning that vision into reality is not something that AI does today. Now you can ask it, "Hey, I have this idea for an XYZ company. What should I do?" And it'll give you an outline. I mean, so certainly it can be useful. But I want to share an example that's hilarious that came up this morning. So my wife and I try to eat organic food when we can, and we buy eggs that are sustainably raised, in a pasture like normal chickens ought to be, kind of thing. And there's an organization that's called Vital Farms. And in each of their egg cartons, they put a little flyer in. I don't think the camera will catch it. Anyway, they put a little flyer in the egg carton. It's like a mini newspaper. They call it the Vital Times, right? And there's a bird of the month that they have every few weeks. And even the little newspaper says, have you ever wondered how the Vital Times, arguably the highest circulation tiny chicken newspaper in the world, makes it into your carton of eggs? Like that is such a human creativity thing, right? And it really makes an impression. It's an incredible part of their branding. I don't think that we'll even see the same, from AI for a long time. And I saw a comment too, from one of the other folks about how they had written an article and then had AI write it and they like their version better. I agree. There's an authenticity to human generated content that you can kind of tell when stuff is AI generated right now, right? There's just some little telltales. I think inspecting what we expect is always just a good leadership principle, but something that we should all be especially vigilant about with AI so that we can have confidence using the tools, that we're not going to get in trouble. And Jennifer mentioned empathy at the beginning. I think it's overall humans continue to generate differentiation with emotional intelligence. So it's taking empathy, but going further into inspiration and motivation. And really, if you look at the examples of exceptional customer service that you hear about, it's because somebody colored outside the rules, right? They went really outside their way to give somebody an incredible customer experience. And it wasn't something that was written down in black and white. They went and asked permission to make an exception, but it really made an impression with that customer and it built their brand, right? And then also being able to have that human connection. Oh, I see you're calling from Florida. Were you guys impacted by the hurricane? Are you okay? Right? Those types of things are not going to be replaced. And in fact, they're even more important, I would argue, in this world.
So just to interject for one moment, and then we'll come to your question, Matthew. I see we're coming close to the top of the hour. Carver, if you could just jump ahead to a couple of others. Oh, okay, there. Never
I
mind.
was just going to let you share, Jennifer, and you can just
Okay,
take it over.
okay. We're doing
Back
this
to
in
you.
real time. Here we go. Here we go. We will have way more time for discussion. For those that have to jump off at the top of the hour, I just want to leave you with three things that when you do leave, whether it's now or within an hour, three things that we would encourage you to do as a result of today. And the first is to explore. This is not the kind of technology that you can learn from a book or from sitting on the sidelines. It's something we all have to be involved in, intelligently using our minds, but thinking about what problems that could we possibly solve with AI. And if you are a dedicated Copilot user, try some of the other tools and compare. How does Copilot compare to ChatGPT, compared to Gemini? Because that is a way of really thinking about what you're using coming out of the technology. And most importantly, when things come at you, when you read something, when you get something, think about what does it really say? Where did it come from? What is the bias that may be built into it? What might be the intent or the business model behind the generator of this? Respond, don't react. Think carefully because we are in a completely new world. And I will bring up here, this is our contact information. Please connect on LinkedIn, but also you see our email addresses here. Feel free to reach out to either Carver or I.